Who were the men of gold, stone and iron? We get so little about them in the lore. But I have some answers about who the men of gold were, why they made the men of stone for space travel, and why the stone men in turn needed and made the men of iron, using the latest Votann lore to shine a light. So let's start with the top dogs, the men of gold. Who were they, outside of being the leaders of humanity? They were simply a ruling caste perhaps, who brought order and structure to the human race, and then looked to the wider galaxy. After a time, as essential resources were running short, the golden race looked to the stars to expand their dominion. To meet this need, the men of stone were made to colonize the galaxy once they're able to carry people on the ships, to go in the men of gold's place to explore. After their creation, in their wake came many miracles and marvels of technology that strengthened the stone men's power and were also harnessed by the golden race, which makes sense as they, as creators, would have access. So I interpret this as the men of gold making AIs that gave them better technology. Just look at what they're doing in our world to change it already and at such an early stage. Perhaps initially they moved around in some sort of dreadnought bodies and over time were installed in ships, or perhaps they just stayed where they were and created new items and put them out using STCs, standard template constructs. But once they moved into the ships, that's when things get very interesting. Now it's noted that the stone men exist in a state of half-life. They're not quite alive, but they're almost there. And because of that, they do not attract the demons of the warp, lowering the risk when they're trying to colonize stars later in their development. I'm going to propose that the ancestor cores of the Votann fit the role of the men of stone. The ancestor cores are ancient machine intelligences who are so complex they could be perceived as supernatural. They hold all the information a race might need to thrive in space. They hold information on specifications, STCs, STDs, and scientific and philosophical learnings, genealogical data, etc. And they fit the men of stone concept so well, as it's also noted about them, that they are bright enough in the warp, in terms of the AI's presence there, that the kin can use them as localized beacons within the warp. The kin are basically your day-to-day gene-altered humans, who were once known as the squats in the old lore. So the AIs have a warp presence, i.e. they are half alive. Now I think on the ships that go out with people on board later, the explorer ships, the men of stone or ancestor cores would carry people, but initially they went out with no human passengers. This would change later of course when Geller fields were developed, and then they were able to carry both the Votann, the kin, however you want to call them, and normal humans out for jaunts amongst the galaxy. Next I theorise the Iron Kin are an early version of the Men of Iron, and those Iron Kin travelled with the ancestor cores or Men of Stone. Let's explain that. We are told the Votann left Terra during likely pre-imperial times on fleets of generation ships, and the kin had the Iron Kin with them at the time as companions, and they consider them equals. The Iron Kin are made by the ancestor cores, i.e. made by the Men of Stone, and aid the Votann in their work. And I just want to make that clear. So I'm saying the Iron Kin were made by the ancestor cores, just as it says in the lore that the Men of Iron were made by the Men of Stone. The Iron Kin are an early version of the Men of Iron. Amongst the roles they serve, the Iron Kin pick up the role of Wayfinders, who work out probable paths through the warp for the kin with their cogitators, allowing the ships to plot short plungers or warp jumps. Now, we are told that the stone men went forth with their servants and swam in the deep oceans. They travelled through the warp, in other words. The servants, as I said, I think are the Iron Kin, and those are a forerunner to the Men of Iron, a V1 if you like. The Iron Kin are made to want to be helpful, but can still develop characteristics to want more, and will even fight alongside the Votann, or the kin as they're also called. So, when did the Men of Stone create the Men of Iron? It's told the Men of Stone created the Iron Men to help them in the building of their own great empire. So I think initially the Iron Men were the kin, a V1, and at first the Iron Men are servants, willing to do the bidding of their masters with no thoughts, but a little personality. However, the Iron Men are kin at the initial stage, as all creatures do evolve and grow, i.e. they change to the smarter men of iron and move away from the Iron Kin level until they are the equals of the stone race, and besides each other, later in the timeline, they set about conquering the galaxy together, and of course eventually turn on each other. So to summarise this part, I think the Iron Kin were early companions as humanity sent ships out into the galaxy, and later as helpers, helping the kin being one example, and other ones who help in different ways depending on what those fleets are intended to do. And then over time, the Iron Kin became the more advanced men of iron, and they began the cybernetic revolt to seek dominance over all others. But what about the men of gold? I can admit here the Votann Lore doesn't exactly shine light on what I say is why create these stone men and send them into the warp when they perhaps could have done this themselves. That's the one angle I can see using the Votann Lore. I think the gold men were psychers, a small elite, maybe perpetuals as well, of some sort. The Emperor had already developed psychic abilities and perpetual abilities at this stage, so that would make sense. It would explain why they did not want to go into the war, because there would be tasty morsels for the demons there, and they must have had some experience with the war. Perhaps they sent out a ship initially with great excitement, and then the ship never came back because the souls on board when they went into the warp were eaten up. So they created this new race, the Men of Stone, to do that. And to add a last little tidbit here, there's also the legend on ancient terror of the cognosynths, psychotyrants who controlled whole nations and warred with each other. Perhaps this has some echo with the Men of Gold. It would explain them being able to unite so much of humanity under their dominion, which would be easier with psycho tyrant level powers. They would just be controlling the masses, though the timing of that law is a little off. So, to summarise this part, I think the Men of Gold were psychers, perhaps perpetuals, and also, to tie into it a little bit, perhaps cognosynths or psychotyrants. So what do you think to this theory? Do you think it answers the mysteries of the Men of Gold, Stone and Iron? What's your take on things? Let's chat in the comments. And also, just to jump back in here after that initial recording of the Votann Lore being used to enlighten what the Men of Gold, Stone and Iron are, I am working on a little bit of a follow-up to that, looking at what I'm dubbing a Men of Stone ship called Slaughter Song from the book Demon World. I've pretty much got that ready to go. Just need to record it probably after this one, but I just wanted to say that that should add to this initial theory and grow it a little bit, showing how the relationship between humanity in terms of them piloting or being a co-decision maker on the Men of Stone ships, how that develops from that initial lot being sent out where you've got the Men of Stone accompanied by the Men of Iron or Iron Kin as I believe them to be, and how that develops so that when humans are on board there is a new dynamic between the Men of Stone and humanity, whereas initially it's between the Men of Stone and the Men of Iron. So just wanted to add a little bit there at the end, just saying that I'm working on another idea to follow this up and grow it. Anyway, enough my waffle, I will get out of here.